Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man. So I appreciate it very much for stopping by, guys. So like I said before, I do have the Fabiano Caruana versus Wesley So game, and this one was for all the marbles. They had to play a series of playoff games, and this was the first of the three. So it was pretty exciting game. It was crazy up and down. They literally just kind of like went up and down the entire game. You know, this is basically what they want when they choose these types of formats. You know, it's like a 5 or 10 minute game or something like that. And in the expectation that somebody is going to get nervous, you know, mismanage their time. And then we will see who is the real champion. Or as they say in Tagalog, see who is malakas. All right, man. For anybody that is coming from the Philippines, as always, I will say mabuhay. Kumusta na aking mga kaibigan. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. And if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. All right, so I think I have my volume up. Correct. All right, so we got c4, knight to f6. We see knight to c3. We got e5. Knight comes to f3. We do see knight to c6. We got e4. Bishop comes to b4. We do see d3. We got d6, a3, and then bishop comes back to c5. And, I mean, we're not worried about if bishop takes here. We're going to be taken back here with the pawn. And as you guys do know, yeah, you do have doubled pawns here. But you do have a nice clump of pawns in the center of the board. And you are absolutely pushing d4 coming up at some point. And then, I mean, also this pawn is, you know, protecting the b4 and the d4 squares. But like I said, we did see bishop back to c5. We got b4. Bishop comes back to b6. We see bishop to e3. We got castles by black. Bishop comes to e2. And then we now see the novelty of the game, which is bishop takes e3. And then we have pawn takes e3. And this might look a little unsightly, but it kind of has the same, you know, idea as before. You know, you're going to get castle king side. So this rook is actually going to have a half open file to deal with, to work with. You know, this pawn is doing a good job of holding the f4 and the d4 squares. So, in general, you want to try to stay away from double pawns, but you also have to kind of think in certain positions, you know, what might you be getting in the case of having some double pawns. So, we do have knight back to e7. We got castles by white. Knight comes to g6. Queen comes to d2. Rook goes over to e8. We see rook a to e1. We got a5. b5, and then we have c6, and you can see that black is trying as much as possible to, you know, take chunks, you know, mess up this pawn clump in the center of the board. So it's one of the things that you can try to do, you know, throw the a pawn, throw the c pawn, just try to break down this structure and give yourself a target, which you will see, you know, black does kind of have a target that white is going to have to, you know, protect. And so we do see bishop down to d1. We see h6. We got d4. The d4 push finally comes in. So, you know, of course, you know, we're hoping for something like this because then we can take back and then we have a really, really nice pawn center. And we do have this open file still. But Wesley So is not doing that. He goes queen to e7. We see bishop up to c2. Bishop comes to d7. And then we do have d5. And after pawn takes b5, pawn takes b5. Unfortunately for Fabiano Caruana, this is not the most desirable pawn chain. You know, you have these double pawns, and it is supporting this far advanced pawn, but, I mean, it's just a little bit unsightly. And you definitely have to move your rook away somewhere to get it off, you know, from behind these double pawns. So we do see rook e to c8, and Fabiano Caruana just decides, hey, I'm going to go ahead and move my bishop up. You know, it's not generally good to have a lot of, you know, pieces clumped up on the same file, you know, especially when you have a rook or a piece attacking them. So we do have a4. Queen comes over to b2. We see queen to d8. Queen comes up to b4, and then we do see queen to a5. And that does allow a trade of pieces. Queen takes a5, rook takes a5, and then we have rook over to c1. And, you know, backing up after queen came to b4, it was possible to go queen to b6. One of the issues that you're looking at is the fact that this pawn is hit. So once this knight moves somewhere, you know, you're free to take it. So you just want to force a trade. But like I said, queen to b6 could have been played, and then you really kind of have to prevent a knight to g4 from coming in, because you are going to be attacking this pawn here. But like I said, we did see rook over to c1. We got rook a to a8. We see knight down to a2 with ideas of trying to bring it up here and just, you know, put their knight in a little bit of a better area. So the knight comes to g4, and this does attack that backward pawn. And so that was one of the things about that position as well, attacking that backward pawn. We do see king over to f8. Knight comes up to b4. We see king to e8. We have h3. Knight comes back up to f6, and then we do have knight down to d2. And it's pretty clear. I mean, we're trying to plop this knight down into c4. It's actually the best square for it to go to. I mean, there you're attacking here, you're attacking here, and you know, you might be getting one of these little forks here. So black, trying to make sure that we prevent that, goes king to e7. It does allow a rook to c4, and now you definitely do have to do something about the rooks being forkable. So we do see rook down to c5. You know, kind of a Petrosian rook, just, you know, kind of clamping it down in the center of the board. The knight does come to b6 anyway. We do see rook down to a5, and this is something that you don't see every day. You know, two rooks kind of like, you know, just separated by one file. It's really interesting. So we have actually reached a point in the game that if you don't want to pause the video, this is actually a position where you can guess two different moves. They're both moves that have to be played. You know, it doesn't really matter which one comes first, but the follow-up has to be this same move. So try to guess the two separate moves that you can play in this position for a nice advantage as white. All right, cool. So what we actually saw in the game was the exclam knight to the rook takes c5 first. And then pawn takes c5, and then you do see knight taking knight to c6 with check. And this is crazy because you're thinking, man, I'm just giving the knight away, right? Kind of, but you're getting a lot in return. But like I said, you could have taken, or you could have checked here first, and then after the pawn takes, then take the rook, and then after that, then you see this here. The main thing that you want to make sure that you prevent is going rook takes. Going knight takes first, and then pawn takes back like this, because now the problem is the rooks are actually connected and can protect each other. So that was the main reason for doing it in the type of a sequence that we saw. So like I said, you know, we did see rook takes c5, pawn takes c5, and then knight to c6, and then we don't have that connection between the rook and that pawn. So pawn takes c6, pawn takes c6, and then you kind of have a decision to make. I mean, you know, where are you going to go? It's actually beneficial if, you know, the king goes back to d8, because of course, you know, you take with the pawn with tempo. So seeing that it is a pretty dire situation, Wesley So decides to go ahead and just give you know, the material back. Pawn, you know, bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6, and then king comes back to d8. You want to be very careful that you don't immediately go after this pawn, because you're going to be looking at this nasty, and you don't want this, man, because that's game over. Let's shake hands, and let's put Fabiano Caruana as the champion. And then, so like I said, we do go king to d8. Knight comes down to d5. Knight takes d5. Pawn takes d5. And then we do see knight up to e7. And even though it seems super natural just to immediately go e4 and just to make sure that we have a nice pawn clump going on over here, it was actually a little bit more active to go rook to f1 here. And then after you would see something like this, you'd actually be looking at rook to f7 with rook to f7, and then your bishop is getting liberated, and you're just kind of clearing up a lot of these pawns. So you would be looking at knight to c7, and then you would see rook to d7, and then you would have to go king to c8 to protect the rook, or to protect the knight, and then you would actually be seeing king takes g7. King would try to come back, and you would see bishop to c4, cutting the king off. Rook would go to a8. Rook would come back to d7 with check. And then the king would go back to c8. Rook would go to a7, and then you got king back to d8. So as you can see, this king is just having to go back and forth. The problem is, in this position, if you leave this alone like this, let's just make a random move. Rook to h8 is going to be really deadly, because now, you know, you're cut off, you're in your king. Your only escape square is forward, so you're going to have to throw this knight in the way. And that's not where you want to be, because all of your pieces are going to be getting gone. So like I said, we did see knight to e7, and then we saw e4. We see knight back to c8. The knight is planning to come back and blockade this square, which is actually a pretty good idea. We see rook over to b1, and then knight comes to d6, doing the perfect blockade. We do see king to f2. We see c4, which is very accurate, you know, just trying to knock this bishop back a little bit. And there's really only one square for it to go to, because this knight is attacking this pawn. So the bishop comes back to c2. And then we see the very, very accurate, aggressive f5. You guys are hearing me talk all the time about trying to, you know, disable people's pawns and attack the pawn chain. And you have to do that from the base. So, you know, of course, you can see it's not possible to attack this pawn. It's not possible to attack this pawn. So you have to undermine this pawn first before you can start trying to attack this pawn structure. So f5 is, you know, very, very logical, principled move. We do see king to e3. King comes to c7. We see rook up to b4. Pawn takes e4. Bishop takes e4. And now, like I said, we have successfully created a new pawn base. You know, this leaves the rook the ability to try to capture at some point. We do see c3. Bishop comes down to c2. We got rook taking d5. And then we see rook taking a4. And before Fabiano Caruana could finish this move and press his clock, he did run out of time. So this allowed Wesley So to be up a game at the start of the playoffs. And then the next game, you know, Fabiano Caruana won. So basically, Wesley So had to lose that game, I believe, for it to matter. But he went on, and you guys saw the video from me yesterday. He did go on to defeat Sam Sevion in brilliant fashion and, you know, secure himself the U.S. championships. So Malakas see Wesley So. You know, I hope to play Wesley So at some point. I think maybe, I mean, before I play him in person, I think I would actually play him online. If I might can get a match, you know, going on. If I might could, you know, just come across him in Bullet someday. It would be interesting to play and just kind of see how it would do. So we'll see when that happens. I'll definitely let y'all know. But yes, that is that game. So for all people in the Philippines, I will do these good mornings. But see how good I can do them. Alright, so maanyong buntag, mayad na agahan, naibeg na bigat, masento siya kabason, marhe na aga, buenos dias, maayong aga, mapia na uma, yeah, kapian kapuno dios, mayapa abak, mayad na aga, mapia agay, mapia kapapizza, my big abukla, marjana buntag, marya may nat, maupe na aga, kasan yangan CLB. Yes, merci, salam, assalamu alaikum to you guys. I appreciate you guys very much. Makito Tayo Mamaya, and I will see you guys next time.